Hey, what up, guys? How are we doing? Hopefully, hanging in there. We are ready for lesson 42, the Teflon presidents. Today, we're going to learn about Ronald Reagan. Okay, in honor of Ronald Reagan, well, let's put it this way. Ronald Reagan was a guy who appreciated a good joke. He had a great sense of humor. So in honor of him, we're going to do some jokes today. Not allowed to fast forward through this. Nope. Nope, nope, nope. All right, you got to hear the jokes. Come on. You know you want to. So, there's so many coronavirus jokes out there. It's a pandemic. Finland just closed its borders. You know what that means? No one will cross the finish line. Aubrey is smiling. Look at her. I can see Aubrey. Aubrey is smiling so big right now. She's just about to break into a laugh. I'll tell you a coronavirus joke now. Let me start over. I'll tell you I can't talk. Good grief. All right. I'll tell you a coronavirus joke now, but you'll have to wait 2 weeks to see if you get it. Woo. Nail salons, hair salons, waxing centers, and tanning places are all closed. It's about to get ugly out there. That's great. It's about to get ugly out there. Woo! So what do you call a bunch of high schoolers that make it through coronavirus? Quarantines. Ooh, that's funny. Serena's laughing. Yep, she's got a smile on her face. She is trying her best to not laugh, but she is laughing inside. All right. Ronaldo Reagan. Before we get into him, we are going to review. Remember, a quiz on Friday. Hopefully, you're watching this before Friday, because if not, that means you are late getting it done. Plus, you're not getting this lesson, which you need to have before you take the quiz on Friday. Otherwise, you're not going to know the stuff, right? Anyway, I guess if you're already watching it too late, it's a little bit late for me to tell you that. All right. Anyway, so the 60s. Remember, we talked about the 60s. What were the positives of the 60s? Better equality for blacks, a distaste for unnecessary war and violence, and a concern for the environment. There are some positive qualities that came out of the 60s. How about some bad things, negatives? There was a complete transformation in morality. Popularization of drugs and the normalization of sexual promiscuity became prevalent in the 60s. There was also a lot of rebellion against authority. Okay? Who were some popular Christian musicians from the well, not necessarily from the 60s, but they came from the Jesus movement, which came out of the hippie movement, which was from the 60s. Some of them were guys like Keith Green, Petra, second chapter of Acts, Larry Norman, Amy Grant. By the way, Amy Grant was the one that wrote the song, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." Nice, get to hear Mr. Weaver sing again, right? But you sang that song, right? You know that song. Amy Grant. The popular pastor during the Jesus movement was a guy named Chuck Smith. Very good. Okay. Make sure I get my papers together here. Where am I at? I'm all messed up. Okay. So yeah, the movement that came out of the hippie movement, where a bunch of people became disenfranchised with the drugs and the sex and all of that, and their lives were empty, and so they turned to Jesus. What was that called? The Jesus movement. And what kind of music came out of the Jesus movement? Contemporary Christian music. Hippies were known for what? drugs, the sexual revolution. Peace, bro. Peace out. Peace. Rock music. Who were some famous rock musicians? Elvis, the Beatles, Jackson 5. Okay. What were some significant events that happened in the 60s? The moon landing. We landed somebody on the moon. That's incredible, right? There was violence. What kind of violence? Racial protests, anti-war protests. Israel became a nation. A lot of people thought it was the end of times. There's a lot of environmentalism started going on in the 60s. Racism. There was a lot of tension and violence. Martin Luther King. What were some of the accomplishments, inventions, and things that happened during the 60s? Inventions of calculator, barcode scanner, CDs, audio cassettes, soft contact lenses, LED lights, computer mouse, video games, basic computer language, Boeing 747 jumbo jet. Okay, there's a lot of economic prosperity in the 60s, the dawn of the information age. Basic computer language was developed. Heart transplant. I might have said all that. Anyway, what 4 major assassinations happened in the 60s? 4 guys that were assassinated. John F. Kennedy, his brother Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X. Okay, cool. Study. Make sure you're ready. Up to par. Ready for the quiz. The quiz on Friday. Quiz on Friday. All right, got it. When's the quiz? Friday. Yep. Ronald Reagan. Okay. Ronald Reagan was a very influential, significant man, significant president. Many conservative Republicans look back to him as kind of the model Republican president. Everybody wants to be like Reagan. Every conservative, not every, that's a little bit of an overstatement, but a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans will model their ideas and their policies and their way of doing things after Ronald Reagan. They look up to him. They often talk back about him in very glowing and very positive ways. When somebody's campaigning for an office, whether it's president or Congress or whatever, and if they're a Republican, they will quote Ronald Reagan a lot. He's just looked at as kind of the quintessential conservative who, made all these wonderful transformations to make our country better. Okay, that's how he is viewed by the conservatives. Now, of course, the liberals have a different story. They don't think he was so great, but even the liberals, to a certain degree, have a lot of them anyway. Not all, but a lot of them have a certain amount of respect and appreciation for Ronald Reagan because of who he was. Kind of like even us conservatives respect. A lot of us conservatives will respect John F. Kennedy. Because JFK, even though he was a Democrat, stood for a lot of good things, and he was a very likable person, right? So anyway, Ronald Reagan was a very popular president. Okay, so let's talk about his life for a bit, and then talk about some of the things that he did and so forth. He was born on February 6th, 1911. In Tampico, Illinois. By the way, Illinois, I think I have this right. I think Illinois has produced more presidents than any other state. I think I have that right. One other famous president came from Illinois. Anybody remember? Abraham Lincoln. Abe Lincoln. All right. He professed Christianity at a young age. His mother was a devout follower, or she was a devout, committed, professing Christian. She was part of a denomination, I think, called the Disciples of Christ. Now, that denomination had some sketchy beliefs, so I don't want to be overly skeptical or whatever, but I'm not exactly sure what they believed. But they did profess Christianity. Ronald Reagan's mother and Ronald Reagan himself. His father was a Catholic, but he decided to reject the Catholic teaching and go with what his mother taught him. He was a very active young man. He was active in sports. He was president of the student body, I think in high school and in college. He did a lot of things, right? So he was an athlete. He played football. Was on the swim team. He ran track. He was involved in student politics. He was a lifeguard. And when he graduated from college, he became a radio sports announcer for the Chicago Cubs. Well, not sure if it was for the Chicago Cubs, but so he was involved with the Chicago Cubs somehow. But anyway, he was a radio sports announcer and eventually became an actor in 1937. And he was actually well on his way to becoming a very popular, very famous actor until World War II broke out. And then he was ordered to military duty. Now, he never actually served in the war because he had poor eyesight. So he wasn't allowed to go to war. He was disqualified. But that kind of derailed his acting career. Nonetheless, he was semi-famous as an actor. Some of his he did some movies that were pretty popular. He acted with some high-profile actors. Now you got to remember this is back in the 30s and 40s, so it's different than today. Guys like Humphrey Bogart, yeah. Anyway, but yeah, he was a pretty popular guy in Hollywood. He ended up marrying Jane Wyman, who was an actress. After he did a film with her, they fell in love, got married, right? Their marriage lasted longer than the typical Hollywood marriage. It lasted for 9 years. So yeah, unfortunately, Ronald Reagan was divorced and eventually remarried. His first wife only lasted for 9 years. He was actually the first president that had previously been divorced. He's the first one. You know who the second one is? Donald Trump. Anyway, for what it's worth. So, divorced her 9 years later, and then eventually married Nancy Davis in 1952. So that's where Nancy Reagan came from, and she was the one who ended up becoming his first lady, right? So, let's talk about some of his political career. By the way, I accidentally knocked the chalk off the chalk holder thing before the video, and it broke into not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 pieces. So I'm not doing great today. Having a rough day. Okay? He began his political career as a Democrat. Okay? Began his political career as a Democrat. He was a big fan of Franklin D. Roosevelt. He loved Franklin D. Roosevelt. In fact, he learned a lot from Franklin D. Roosevelt. A lot of tools that he used later as the president, he learned from FDR. Okay? The way he was able to connect directly to the American people. The way he was able to kind of get down on their level and just connect with them as kind of a regular guy, because FDR was good at that, and Reagan learned that from him. He appeared on stage with Harry Truman at an event. He actually, because he was an actor, he was semi-famous or whatever. So at one point he was actually on stage with Harry Truman, and then he joined several left-leaning organizations, serious Democrat organizations. But eventually, he started to become more and more conservative. Over time, he became more conservative. What caused that? Why did he become more conservative? Well, one thing was he was very concerned about communism. He started noticing that there was some communist influence in some of these left-leaning organizations. Some of these kind of super Democrat organizations that he was part of. They actually favored communism or had a certain amount of communist influence. And he was like, no way. I don't want that. I'm not going there, right? And some of these organizations, like the labor unions and stuff, they were so pushy. They were like bullies. They tried to get people to do what they want, and they were extremely bullyish about it, even physically sometimes to Ronald Reagan himself. If he didn't go along with what they wanted, they got physically rough with him at times. And he was like, I don't, that's not what I want to be a part of. I don't want that. He also became very disenfranchised with high taxes. He didn't like how the liberals were just taxing people like crazy. And so he slowly became more and more conservative. One of the things that influenced him toward conservatism even more was his marriage to Nancy. Nancy was a conservative, and she influenced him to become more and more of a conservative. Interestingly enough, Jane Wyman, his first wife, was also a conservative, and that's actually part of the reason they divorced. It was because at the time Ronald was a Democrat, and Jane was, I think she was a Republican, or at least she was more conservative than him. And that's part of what led to the tension that caused them to get a divorce. And Ronald ends up later becoming a Republican, which is interesting. And part of the reason he became a Republican later was because of his second wife, Nancy, right? But that wasn't the only reason. There were other reasons. There were numerous other reasons. So in the early 60s, he becomes a Republican. He endorses Dwight Eisenhower for president. And then he gains national attention campaigning for a guy named Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater was a presidential candidate who ran against, I'm not sure who. But anyway, he was a conservative who ran for president and lost. And Reagan gained a certain amount of popularity when he gave a speech for Goldwater. It was a very good speech, and people were like, wow, this guy's articulate, he's good with words, he's a conservative, we like him. So he became he started at that point to become sort of a rising star in the conservative political world. He became the governor of California in 1967. And so he was the governor of California from 1967 to 1975. So a two-term governor of California. And again, California is a very liberal state. They don't elect Republicans too often. Back then, maybe it was a little different. I don't know. The thing was, Reagan wasn't as conservative when he was a Republican in California. He actually signed bills, or at least a bill, that made abortion, that expanded abortion in California when he was the governor there. Now later he regretted it and said if he had to do it over, he would not have signed that bill. He later became a very pro-life president, a very pro-life politician. But at the time, he wasn't as conservative, and he actually, you might say promoted abortion when he was governor of California. He becomes the president in 1981. Let's just go ahead and start over. So, 2 days after yours truly, Mr. Weaver, is born. 2 years before. Two days. Okay, I messed that all up. January 20th, 1981, 2 days before yours truly, Mr. Weaver, was born, Ronald Reagan becomes the president of the United States. I missed Jimmy Carter by 2 stinking days. Otherwise, I could say that I was alive during the presidency of Jimmy Carter. I missed it. Anyway, He won the election in overwhelming fashion. Jimmy Carter was not a real popular president. He kind of pandered, didn't really do a lot of great things. He was a nice guy. Part of the thing with Jimmy Carter, he was just kind of a nice guy, down to earth, Southern Baptist. He was likable, but he just didn't get a lot accomplished, and there was a lot of problems, things going on. People were afraid of what was going on in Russia, the Soviet Union, the Cold War. Jimmy Carter didn't really stand up to them very well. Reagan comes along and campaigns on these ideas of building up the military so that you can bargain from a position of strength, or negotiate, I should say, from a position of strength rather than weakness, so we can stand up to the communists. He also campaigned on the idea of lowering taxes to free up business so that they can thrive and the economy can thrive. Anyway, he was very articulate, very good at what he did, a very good campaigner. He won in overwhelming fashion in the election of 1980, and he became president in 1981. He is tested within just over 2 months. He survives an assassination. On March 1981. Okay? Somebody tried to kill him. Wasn't me. I was only like 2 months old. Okay? I was only 2 months old. All right? Was not me. I forget the guy's name. John Hinckley, I think. John Hinckley Jr. And I have a video attached to this lesson I want you to watch that talks about the assassination, or the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. It has video footage of the events you can kind of see. You don't actually see the guy with the gun, but you hear the shots and people jumping around and all of that. So make sure you watch that video. It's very interesting. He took a bullet to his side, right under his armpit. It came within an inch of his heart. The Secret Service agent who was with him jumped on him, took him down, and put him and shoved him into the limousine. They say if he wouldn't have done that, the next bullet probably would have hit him in the head and killed him. Actually, I don't know if it was the next bullet, but one of the bullets would have, the way the trajectory of the shots went, probably would have hit him in the head. But the one that actually hit him ricocheted off the car and hit him in the side. So I don't know how you miss when you're that. I mean, the guy was only like 20 or 30 feet away. How he actually didn't directly hit Ronald Reagan. He missed him. The only reason he hit him is because it ricocheted off the car door and hit him. Anyway, the guy didn't know what he was doing, but he injured Reagan, and he actually injured 3 other guys in the process. A policeman, I think another Secret Service agent, and the press secretary was actually hit in the head and had brain damage for the rest of his life. Reagan shoved him into the car. They started heading for the White House. Initially, the Secret Service agent that pushed him in the car where he was with him, initially he thought he was okay, that he hadn't been hit, because he felt him and he couldn't find any blood or bullet holes. But then he actually started spitting up blood from his mouth. And immediately the Secret Service agent said, "We can't go to the White House. We have to go to the hospital right now." And again, that decision probably saved his life. So that Secret Service agent was responsible for saving Reagan's life twice, you can argue. Now some people say, yeah, but he was also the one who let the bad guy get as close as he did. How could they let that happen, right? He was not very far away when he started shooting at him with this little .22 pistol. But anyway, they got him to the hospital, put him into surgery, and he survived. And the interesting thing about that whole debacle was Reagan kept up his spirits. He would crack jokes, so just as he was going into surgery, he looks at the doctors and he's like, "I hope none of you guys are Democrats." And then when Nancy came to see him, he's like, "Nancy, I forgot to duck." So he kept up his spirits. About a month later, he was out and giving a speech to the Americans again. He stayed upbeat and positive, and because of that incident, surviving that event, plus having such upbeat spirits and such a positive attitude through the whole thing, really won over the hearts of the American people. I mean, he was already a popular president to begin with, but when that happened, it really, really resonated with the American people. This guy is the real deal, and we like him. Okay. Anyway, so survived the assassination attempt on March 30th. He won re-election in 1984, so he started a second term in 1985. So, he won his second term. He won his first term in resounding fashion, but his second term, I think, was even more so. I mean, he just slaughtered the opposition. I think the guy's name was Walter Mondale, and he just beat the daylights out of him. Okay. So why was Ronald Reagan so popular? Now, he wasn't popular absolutely all the time. He went through some stages in his presidency. There were some scandals. There were some things that were a little sketchy. And during those times, his popularity did dip. But overall, he was a fairly popular president. And even to this day, a lot of people look back at him as, he was a good president, a guy who a lot of people respect, a lot of people look up to. People on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, to a certain degree. Okay? So why was he so popular? Well, he was just a likable guy. Okay? If you look at videos and pictures of him, he's almost always smiling. Like he has this kind of cheesy grin on his face. Like he's fixing to pull a prank on somebody or something. He's always smiling. He loved to laugh, loved to crack jokes. And during debates, he used this as an incredibly effective tool during debates. Somebody would kind of try to pin him down, and he would crack a joke. And that's one of the best ways to respond if somebody's trying to put you in a corner sometimes, is to just make it funny, right? And he was a master at that. And another thing he learned to do is he learned how to speak directly to the American people. And again, I think he learned this from FDR. FDR, remember his fireside chats? He would sit in his wheelchair, which the American people couldn't see the wheelchair because it was on the radio. But he would sit there and he would talk directly to the people. And Reagan learned how to do that. Instead of talking to the press and letting the press tell the people what they thought, which not that he didn't talk to the press, he did, but he also had a way of connecting directly to the people. It wasn't like he was up here talking down to people. He talked to them like they were on his level, right? He talked to people like they mattered. Okay. He was also very tough. So he was likable, but he was tough. And again, surviving the assassination was something that people respected, because he was 70 years old, I think, when he was shot. And when somebody that's that old is shot, you would think it would be a pretty significant recovery. Maybe they would never recover completely, right? When you're that old, injuries like that are just more significant. He fully recovered, and within a month he was back giving speeches to the American people. And yeah, he cared about people. He was no respecter of persons. He cared for anyone, whether they were a CEO of a Fortune 500 company or just a janitor. There was one time where he gave a speech, and it was a terrible speech. The next day the press was just having a heyday, just mocking this speech that Reagan gave. And so he was talking to some of his staffers, and he was like, I know that wasn't a great speech, but the guy that wrote it for me worked so hard, and he tried so hard, and I just didn't have the heart to change it because I didn't want to disappoint him. So that's the kind of guy he was. He cared about everybody. Okay. He wasn't egotistical. Okay? Or at least you couldn't tell if he was. He was very good at coming across as an ordinary guy. Okay? Not this egotistical, I'm the president, like so many elitist type politicians. They just have this attitude like, I know best and you guys are all stupid and you should listen to me and do what I say. Like that's the attitude of so many politicians. Ronald Reagan didn't have that attitude. He was self-deprecating. What does self-deprecating mean? It means you're okay with like knocking yourself down, right? You're okay with laughing at yourself, making jokes about yourself. He would make jokes about how old he was, right? Because that was one of the things, is he's the oldest guy to ever be president. And so at the time, he is the oldest man to ever be elected president, and he would make jokes about it and stuff like that. And anyway, that had a way of winning the loyalty of the American people. He was not an elitist. One of the quotes that he had on the wall of his office was, "There is no limit to what a man can do or where he can go if he does not mind who gets the credit." So one of his philosophies to live by was he wanted to do great things even if he didn't get the credit for it. And that's pretty astounding, right? He believed in the American people. He was very optimistic. Yeah, he believed that if you let the American people do their thing, if you give them freedom, let them make their choices, that they're going to make the country prosper. Had a great sense of humor, but he also took his job very seriously. Okay? So yeah, he had a great sense of humor, but it wasn't like he was just always a comedian and everything was funny. He knew when it was time to be serious, and he knew when, he believed in very powerful, very, very profound principles, and he knew how to articulate them in a serious way. Another thing was that he made friends with his opponents. And this is a really interesting one. One that, we wish we would have more of today. He would make friends with his political opponents. There was the Speaker of the House. So right now, Donald Trump is the president. Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House, right? They can't stand each other. They hate each other, or at least that's what it appears, right? They can't say anything nice about each other. Right? They can't ever have a good, meaningful conversation. Ronald Reagan, when he was a president, the Speaker of the House was a guy named Tip O'Neill. And Ronald Reagan made a rule that Tip O'Neill could say anything he wanted about him from any time during the day up till 6 o'clock. But then he said, at 6 o'clock, after 6 o'clock, we're going to be friends. And they would hang out. They would talk, they would laugh, they would joke. They were genuine friends. During the day up till 6 o'clock, they would say all kinds of nasty things about each other like politicians do. But at 6 o'clock, they were back to being friends again. I know that might sound kind of strange, but it just goes to show you can actually have relationships with people that you maybe don't agree with, or who are, opposed to you in certain ways, don't agree with you about a lot of things, you can still have a friendship and still have a relationship with them. You don't have to let those opposing views keep you from having a relationship, right? People are still human beings. And Ronald Reagan knew that and understood that, and he treated people that way. And one of the last things, and probably the thing that made Ronald Reagan probably the thing that won him the most popularity, is that he despised communism and he stood against the Soviet Union. I think there's 2 N's in there. Sorry, this handwriting is getting really bad. We're going to try that. Let me just put it up here. He despised communism and he stood against the Soviet Union. Okay? He hated communism. He was determined. He was bound and determined to stand against the Soviet Union and to not let them gain power and influence in his country or close to his country. He was determined, okay? And we'll get to a little bit more about that later. He referred to the Soviet Union as an evil empire. Like, nobody else had the courage to say that. Ronald Reagan said it. Okay, he said it's an empire that is based on an evil philosophy, an evil way of thinking, right? And it actually, that kind of rhetoric, that kind of language, actually heightened the tension with the Soviet Union for a time. It made the Cold War a little bit more tense for a while. But in the end, it also gave Reagan bargaining power, and it also helped him. He ended up getting a lot of credit for standing against them. So let's talk about his accomplishments. What did he accomplish as president? What were some of the good things? Now, this might be a little bit controversial, but during his presidency, the economy in the United States absolutely took off. Okay, when he took over as president, it was really slow. Things were tough during the Jimmy Carter years. There was kind of a recession, and things were not going well. Initially, when Reagan took over, he tried his tax cut policies and all this thing, and it took a little while. It took a few years, and nothing really happened. In fact, there was kind of a bigger recession that happened at the beginning of his first term in office, and he kind of changed his tactics. And that's the thing. The whole thing of economics, people want to oversimplify it, and presidents can have some impact on how it goes, but they can't completely control it. And so even though he was cutting taxes and things like that, it seemed like it took a little while for that to kick in or something. And he ended up increasing taxes and doing some things that he initially hadn't said he was going to do. But anyway, it's kind of a long story. But a lot of people think that his policies led to the economic boom that started in the 80s and lasted all the way into the 90s and really all the way to 2008 probably, and some people might even say up till today to a certain degree. So there was an economic recovery during his presidency. He was very pro-life. So he did, he pushed back against abortion. I'm not sure what kind of policies he did. Like I said, when he was governor of California, he actually supported some pro-abortion policies, but he really changed his mind on this. He really became a very pro-life president. He promoted freedom, just overall freedom in the United States. He wanted Americans to be free. So he took away regulations. He tried not to tax people so hard. That, again, there's a bit of a controversy around that. Sometimes he did raise taxes. But yeah, he promoted the freedom of the American people so that the American people could flourish. Right? He also built up the military. And this was because he wanted to be able to stand up to the Soviet Union. He didn't want to negotiate from a position of weakness. He wanted to be able to negotiate from a position of power. He started a missile defense program that was designed to actually shoot missiles out of the sky while they were on their way to America. So in other words, if the USSR would have shot a missile toward us, Reagan wanted to start a program where you could actually shoot that missile down. And I think the initial program, they're actually going to try to do it from space. They're going to try to shoot missiles down from space. Now, the program never came to full fruition, I don't think, but the technology that came out of it has led to a lot of the missile defense systems that we have today. Now, I don't think we can shoot missiles from space that I know of, but I do think we have the capabilities of shooting down missiles that are coming. So anyway, Reagan kind of started that. It was called Star Wars, right? Anyway. Many argue that he contributed to the end of the Cold War. So again, as we talked about when we talked about the Cold War, really probably the main reason the Cold War ended was because people just were sick and tired of communism. They were sick and tired of tyranny. They hated it, and so they turned against it. But Reagan helped that process along. Again, he stood up. He called the Soviet Union an evil empire, and I think it was in 1987. He went and he visited Germany, where the Berlin Wall was. We talked about that, how they had surrounded West Berlin with a wall so that nobody could get out or in. Or actually, do I have that right? They surrounded. Anyway, they had it so nobody could escape from East Berlin into West Berlin to get away, right? And Reagan went and visited Germany, and he went right up to that wall, and he made a speech. And in the speech, he said, "Mr. Gorbachev," remember, Mikhail Gorbachev was the last communist premier of Russia. He said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Okay. Again, I have a link, a video I want you guys to watch about that. And he's very famous for that speech. And it wasn't very long after that the Soviet Union collapsed. Many communist countries, the communism disintegrated, and they set up free representative governments. And the wall got torn down very soon after he made that speech. So anyway, sounds good, right? Everything sounds good. Well, there were some things about Ronald Reagan's presidency that weren't fantastic, okay? There were some controversial things and even some scandals. So what were the negatives of his administration? One of the things that Reagan did that is kind of perplexing to a lot of conservatives, at least honest conservatives, is that he campaigned on the idea of balancing the budget and shrinking the government and decreasing government spending. In the end, he actually did the opposite. Okay? Overall, Reagan increased government spending exponentially. Now, to be fair, he had a roaring economy, right? The economy had taken off. The country was prosperous, and the more prosperous the country is, the more money people make, the more taxes they pay, which means the more money the government has. So to be fair, you might say he spent a lot of money. Well, he had the money to spend to a certain degree. Now, I think he also borrowed some, but anyway, I don't know all the nitty-gritty details. But a lot of people were a little bit perplexed about how much Reagan ended up spending. Kind of like right now with Trump is the same thing. Trump is spending a lot of money, which I understand the coronavirus thing that's a whole different thing. But even before that, he was spending a lot of money. It's like, I thought this guy was a conservative, right? So anyway, it's a habit that we Americans seem to have, and we can't get away from it. But anyway, that was one thing. Another one was called the Iran-Contra affair. Piece of chalk, just shredding. Go ahead and get rid of it. The Iran-Contra affair was, there were, again, a lot of details, and I'm not going to get into all of it. Iran had several U.S. hostages. Reagan decided he wanted to negotiate for the release. Congress had made a law that saying that the United States would not support terrorists, would not negotiate with terrorists, would not support them in any way, would not give them weapons or money or anything. Well, guess what? The Reagan administration ended up giving money, or at least they gave them supplies and weapons to Iranian terrorists, who then gave them to a terrorist group in Nicaragua, the Contras, who were trying to fight for Nicaraguan independence of some sort. Okay, so the Reagan administration actually gave weapons to terrorists, okay, to negotiate the release of American hostages. Now you can say there was a good motive, yeah, and I think they did get Americans released. Now I think some say that actually right after those Americans were released, the Iranians just went and got 3 more hostages. I don't know, but anyway, it turned into a big, ugly mess. When people found out, they mistrusted Reagan. Reagan had been known for his honesty and his integrity, and now all of a sudden he was doing some things that were illegal and shady, and you can argue that he may not have been completely honest about the whole thing. He did give a speech, and he took credit, took responsibility for it. Now, in the speech, he claimed that he didn't really know what was going on. Did he? I don't know. Well, that's kind of how presidents work. And by the way, Reagan's not the only one to have these kind of scandals, right? Just about every sitting U.S. president has some kind of thing that they tried to do or did, and you look at it like, I don't think that was quite, kosher, right? Because they're trying to get things done. And in a democracy, you're limited. If you always go through Congress and you always take all the right, go through all the right bureaucratic ways of getting it done, you're just never going to get anything done, right? Or at least not significant. And so a lot of presidents will try to cut corners and do things to go against the rules so that they can get something done. That's what Reagan did. He got caught, and he got in trouble for it. He himself never really got in trouble, but actually quite a few of his administration got in deep trouble, and a lot of them had to be removed from office and so forth because of that. Anyway, there were some other scandals and controversial things that happened during the Reagan administration. But the interesting thing about Ronald Reagan is that he was always able to survive those controversies. Some presidents, when a controversy came up, it destroyed them. A lot of presidents. It either destroys them or at least dramatically lowers their popularity. And Reagan, he took responsibility for the Iran-Contra affair. Most of the time in politics, when a politician takes responsibility and apologizes, it's almost always political suicide. It's the way our system works. You can't apologize. You have to make excuses or downplay it or try to get around it somehow or act like you weren't really involved, which, again, maybe he kind of did that too. But if you take responsibility for something that happened that was negative, it almost always kills your political career, or at least dramatically lowers your popularity and your ability to get anywhere politically in the near future. Right? It takes time to get over it. But for some reason, Ronald Reagan was able to constantly bounce back from those scandals. And that's why he's called the Teflon president. Okay? It was like you couldn't bring him down, no matter what. He always had a way of bouncing back. They would temporarily hurt his image, but eventually he would become popular again. And when he ended his tenure as the president in 1989, he had the strongest approval rating of a president at the end of his career, I think, since Franklin D. Roosevelt. Okay, so overall, he was a very, very popular president. And again, there's a variety of reasons, but I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that he was a likable guy. He was a down-to-earth, likable, funny. He spoke directly to the American people, not down to them like he was better, but just like to them, like they were his fellow countrymen. He cared about people, okay? But at the same time, even though he was likable and funny, he was tough. He was tough against the Soviet Union. He was tough against our enemies. So, yeah, that was Ronald Reagan. I want to, just to finish the video up, I want to read a bunch of his popular quotes because, again, he was a master communicator. The guy was great at communicating and giving speeches. He just had a way of winning the hearts of people. Actually, before we do that, I should put down that he died in 2004, the year that Mrs. Weaver and I got married, by the way. But anyway, he got Alzheimer's or he announced to the world that he had Alzheimer's in 1994. He lived another 10 years after that and died in 2004 at the age of, I think, 90 or 92 or something like that. So he lived a long life. Anyway, some famous quotes from Ronald Reagan. Okay? Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on to them to do the same. We can't help everyone, but everyone can help someone. We must reject the idea that every time a law is broken, society is guilty rather than the lawbreaker. It is time to restore the American precept that each individual is accountable for his actions. It's a great concept, right? So often in our country or in culture around us, people want to blame society for people's problems. If somebody makes a bad decision, it's because of all the other people. It's because of society. It's because of the influences, right? Reagan says, no, you need to take responsibility for your actions. Above all, we must realize that no arsenal, no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. So he's advocating that the biggest weapon against communism and tyranny is freedom. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. Great quote. Great quote. Coercion, after all, merely captures man. Freedom captivates him. Government exists to protect us from each other. Where government has gone beyond its limits is in deciding to protect us from ourselves. If we ever forget that we're one nation under God, then we will be one nation going under. The struggle now going on for the world will never be decided by bombs or rockets, by armies or military might. The real crisis we face today is a spiritual one. At root, it is a test of moral will and faith. Freedom is the right to question and change the established way of doing things. This is a good one. Government is like a baby, an alimentary canal with a big appetite at one end and no responsibility at the other. Good. Good. Oh, let's see. There's a bunch here. I don't think I'm going to read them all. There are no great limits to growth because there are no limits of human intelligence, imagination, and wonder. This is one of his funny ones about his age, okay? Listen closely to make sure you get it. Thomas Jefferson once said, "We should never judge a president by his age, only by his works." And ever since he told me that, I stopped worrying. Let's see. Yeah. If we lose freedom here, there is no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. There are no easy answers, but there are simple answers. We must have the courage to do what we know is morally right. Without God, democracy will not and cannot long endure. Anyway, the future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted, it belongs to the brave. In raising and instructing our children, in providing personal and compassionate care for the elderly, in maintaining the spiritual strength of religious commitment among our people, in these and other ways, America's families make immeasurable contributions to America's well-being. Today, more than ever, it is essential that these contributions not be taken for granted, and that each of us remember that the strength of our families is vital to the strength of our nation. So, yes, and again, there is no limit to the amount of good you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. That's a fantastic quote. Oh, this is a funny one. This is a really funny one. I have wondered at times what the Ten Commandments would have looked like if Moses had run them through the U.S. Congress. Woo. We will always remember, we'll always be proud. We will always be prepared, so we will always be free. Anyway, Ron Reagan, Ronaldo, Reagano, he was an inspiring guy. Okay, had a lot of good leadership qualities, did a lot of good things, wasn't perfect, but it had a big impact on our country. And yeah, that's Ronald Reagan. Make sure you look at the lesson, read the pages that I designate for you to read. I believe it's pages 606 to 613 in Changing Frontiers. Make sure you watch the videos. They're not very long, okay, but they give more perspective about Ronald Reagan. All right, guys. Hope things are going well for you. Don't forget to keep an eye on your lessons. Keep getting things done. Keep up with your lessons, guys, okay? We're on the home stretch. We are on the home stretch. We have basically less than a month left of school, okay? Less than a month. Finish well. Finish well. You don't want to look back at this and say, man, I wish I would have applied myself more. I know we're all facing this challenge, this coronavirus thing. It's a challenge. It's not easy. Don't let it bring you down. Don't let it bring your grades down, okay? Finish this school year as hard as you possibly can, okay? Be like Ronaldo Reagano, Ronald Reagan. Be positive, optimistic, and don't care who gets the credit. See you later.